Boker Tov, Boker Tov. Tov, thank you. Bar mitzvah the grandson. Thank you. That was Shabbat. That was Shabbat. Yeah. My grandson laned. He laned almost as fast as my son did for his bar mitzvah, and it shows that both have their eyes in the sky. When my son Eitan was bar mitzvah, it was Parshat Ki Tisa. So there, if you remember, 2/3 of the parsha, you're ready at Shlishi. 2/3 of the parsha, my father Shalom went over to him and he said, it was right after Purim. He said, the minhag of reading with one breath, Nishmat Achat, was only said about the 10 sons of Haman. Wasn't for the first 2 parshas of Ki Tisa, but that's how it sounded like. But all right. Baruch Hashem. As usual, the shiurim are in memory of Elisheva Frist, Elisheva Sima bat Zalman. The trip to Poland went well, thank God. We all come back okay. And today and next Monday, will actually be our last shiur of this particular season, as the OU is going to be in flux for a few weeks, even though there will be shiurim the week of the 12th. But I mentioned to Rabbi Sam that I already thought there wouldn't be, and I already have something in place there. So next Monday will be our last. It'll be Rosh Chodesh Av, and we're going to complete that page that we began a few weeks ago of Psukkah Zimra and Hallel. And being that we say Hallel next Monday, so we'll complete this discussion of Hallel next week. This coming Shabbat is Birkat HaChodesh, and so we're going to do something about Birkat HaChodesh. There will be somewhat of a chofesh, a vacation from the shiurim at the center, and as you may have heard, the Israel Center is relocating. I don't know if it's permanent, temporary. The offices are not going to be here. The offices are going to be in Har Chotzvim, but the shiurim are going to be in different locations in Yerushalayim. They piloted this as an experiment with Baka already for the last 2 years in Rabbi Finkelstein's shul, but our shiurim, at least my shiurim, are going to be held in Rabbi Wein's shul in the Beit Knesset Hanasi, but it's not going to be on Monday, it's going to be on Wednesday. So this is going to be announced, and it's going to start in September, I think at the same time, at 9:15. You have to check the Torah tidbits, but it's going to be starting September Wednesdays, and we're going to do from the Machzor of Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur until the Chagim, and then afterwards we'll get back to some topic of, I'll give some thought, maybe we'll do some different topic. So next Monday is the last year that's going to be here, Rosh Chodesh Av, and then afterwards we'll resume in the Rabbi Wein Shul, which is Rehov Yusishkin 24 in Rechavia. Right. All the streets in Rechavia are biblical commentators and Rishonim. You have Ramban, you have Ibn Ezra, and you have Radak, and so on. And Rambam also. Ben Maimon is Rambam, because they didn't want to call Ramban and Rambam, and people would get mixed up, so they called them Maimonides in Hebrew. Ben Maimon. Maimonides in Hebrew means the son of Maimon. So you have Ben Maimon. So the street that today is Ushishkin was originally Yehuda Levi, Rabbi Yehuda Levi, but Ushishkin was then the chairman of the Jewish Agency, and the building was right here, and he wanted a street named after himself, so they moved Rabbi Yehuda Levi to a different neighborhood, and he became one of the biblical commentators. No, but he became Rehov Ushishkin. That's what happened. He insisted. The rest is there parking. There's sometimes parking. Don't go up Karen Kayemet, because there you'll never get. But in the side streets there, sometimes you get parking. Right? Shall I give you an idea? Park in the Wolfson building. The Wolfson building, it's free parking there. And if he asks you if you're using the supermarket, so say yes and then go in and buy a chocolate. That's all. But usually they don't ask when you go into it's a free parking. It's a block away. Or the medical center. Right, or a doctor, right. Shouldn't need it, right. Right, you're going to the doctor. See, you're a Galciana, They usually don't ask, right. Okay. It's of great interest that Birkat HaChodesh that's somewhat of an attraction in shuls today, especially those that have big chazanim. So you get the Great Synagogue and so on, or chazan and choir combo. So Birkat HaChodesh, remember when we lived in Borough Park, so Moshe Kusevitsky's yahrzeit is actually coming up. He died in 1966 in the end of the summer and beginning of Elul. We moved to Borough Park in 62, and my father, Olav Shalom, used to tell us, Moshe is not getting any younger, and he was right. So we would try to, in Yiddish we say chaparayim, just get in a little bit. Once a year we went for Birkat HaChodesh, and once a year we went for Tfilat Geshem on Shmini Atzeret, and we also used to go to hear him for Slichot on the Motzei Shabbos before Rosh Hashanah. So we had a little bit about Moshe Kusevitsky. Birkat HaChodesh was an attraction, no doubt, and yet in Shulchan Aruch, it's not mentioned that we do Birkat HaChodesh. It's mentioned incidentally by the Ramah on Shulchan Aruch, Ramah She'ezelis, who says that on Birkat HaChodesh, we don't say Avarachamim. So if you look at source number 1, 4 lines down from Shulchan Aruch Hilchot Shabbat, it says V'noagim lomar. The minhag, the custom is to say Yikum Purkan, that we say Yikum Purkan after the Haftarah, and at the end of the line it says V'gam ke noagim lomar Avarachamim. So what is Avarachamim? Avarachamim is actually Yizkar, a collective Yizkar, that was instituted after the pogroms of 1096. 1096 was the pogroms of the main cities of Jewish centers of Shum, Shin, Vav, Mem, Speyer, Varmeisia, which is Worms, and Magensia, which is Mainz. Those 3 cities that we actually make reference to in some of our kinot on Tisha B'Av. We talk about those pogroms, and the original institution of saying Avarachmim was for twice a year, the Shabbat before Shavuot and the Shabbat before Tisha B'Av. So those 2 Shabbatot were where there was this collective Yizkar for these cities of Ashkenaz. After the 1648 pogroms, it was upgraded to say it every Shabbat, except for a Shabbat that might be some type of a simcha of some sort. And one of the Shabbatot that Avarachmim would not be said would be a Birkat HaChodesh, except the Shabbatot in the days of the Sfira, where also there was Avelut, so the Ashkenazim would say Avarachmim even after the Birkat HaChodesh of Iyar and Sivan. After the Shoah, Rav Tzvi Yehuda Kook in the Merkaz Harav Yeshiva here in Kiryat Moshe instituted to say Avarachmim every single Shabbat. And nobody else picked up on that except for Rav Tzvi Yehuda, except that during this war since Simchat Torah, there were quite a few Rabbanim, including Rav Hershel Shechter in America, said we should say Avarachmim every Shabbat. And in my shul we're doing this in Ol Nechama, but not every shul picked up on that as well. So in this context of Avarachmim, it says, Uv'chol yom she'alef alef, ein omrim tzidkascha tzedek. That's what we say on Shabbat by Mincha. So, which really means a Shabbat that if it would be a day and a weekday, we wouldn't say Tachnun, like Rosh Chodesh, like Chanukah, like this, like that. All kinds of days in the calendar that we don't say Tachnun, but it happens to be a Shabbat. We don't say Tachnun anyway. But in Mincha, we wouldn't say tzidkascha tzedek, which is also a type of Avelut over the death of Moshe Rabbeinu, by the way. So Einam Rimoto, we don't say Avarachmim. And then it says also V'chein Kishesh Chatuna, if there's a Sheva Brachos or Brit Milah on Shabbat. So those are days. And then it says V'yesh Mekomot, and there are places She'einam Rimoto, we don't say Avarachmim Kishim Mevorchin HaChodesh. Milvat b'mei Asfira, except for the days of Sfirat Omer, where we do say Avarachmim, even though it's Birkat HaChodesh of Iyar or Sivan. So this is how Birkat HaChodesh sneaks into Shulchan Aruch in the back door, in the context of those Shabbatot that we do not say Avarachmim. So even Avarachmim is an add-on, only from the 12th century, from the 11th century further, after the 1096. And there's certain days that we don't say Avarachmim on Shabbat, and certain we do, and that's how the Birkat HaChodesh snuck in. I remember there are different calendars that say that on Shabbat Birkat HaChodesh for Iyar you say, but for Sivan not, and some say just the opposite, for Sivan we say, and for Iyar for not. I coined a new disease. It's called the Avarachmim syndrome. Tismonet Avarachamim in Hebrew, and that is a person who has in his talus bag different calendars, and whatever the shul does, he whips out the calendar of the opposite just to make trouble. He's a troublemaker. And I had such a person in Ramot who suffered chronically from Tismonet Avarachamim, and I took him privately to the side, and I said, can you tell me who authored the Avarachmim and when it entered into the Siddur? Of course, knowing he wouldn't have a clue. I said, until you find that out, you don't have a right to say if you say it or not. That's all. Because it was ridiculous. He was just a troublemaker, that's all. And the truth of the matter is, the original minhag of Avarachmim, just twice a year, you can still see it in authentic Frankfurt communities. That is Rav Breuer in Washington Heights, and a particular shul in Zurich, and one shul in London. What? In Amsterdam, you have it. Authentic, those who have minhag Frankfurt. And my father-in-law, Sholem, who was born in Frankfurt, was 75, we bought him a book, a big sefer. It was called Minhag Frankfurt. And we told him that the Frankfurt Jews at Har Sinai stayed for another 10 minutes to get this book. These are add-ons. Minhag Frankfurt, like, you wash before you make Kiddush Friday night, and all kinds of Minhag Frankfurt that are still known until this very day. And I remember in Zurich, they said Avarachmim twice a year, just for the Shabbat before Tisha B'Av and the Shabbat before Chag HaShavuot. V'seida. So that's how Birkat HaChodesh sneaks into Shulchan Aruch. Now, in source number 2 is lifted out of the Siddur, the Ratzon that we say, introducing the Birkat HaChodesh. And what's interesting is that this whole Yiratzon, the Shetchadesh Aleinu et HaChodesh Hazeh L'Tova L'Vracha, God should renew the month and it should be L'Tova and Bracha. And then it comes this V'titen Lanu. He should give us, Chaim Arukim, long life, Chaim Shel Shalom, Chaim Shel Tova, Chaim Shel Bracha, Chaim Shel Parnasah, Chaim Shel Chilutz Atzamot, means we should be strong and our bones should, be able to be invigorated. Chaim Sheyesh Behem Yirat Shamayim V'Yirat Chet, Chaim She'en Behem B'Shua B'Chalima, Chaim Shel Oshe V'Chavod, Chaim She'tehevanu Avat Torah V'Yirat Shamayim. And people have already asked, why is Yirat Shamayim, God-fearing, mentioned twice? To a line before, it says, Chaim sheyesh behem yirat shamayim and yirat chet, God-fearing and fear of sin. And then afterwards, Chaim shetehei banu avat Torah, we should have the love of Torah and yirat shamayim. Now, so the joke is that after you've just said, Chaim shel oshe v'chavod, the life of wealth and honor, then people tend to lose their God-fearing status. So they need what's called a booster shot of yirat shamayim. That's the joke. But if you take a look at source number 3. Source number 3 comes from Masechet Brachot, the second chapter, Daf Tet Zayin. And there, the Gemara tells us that when we complete Shmon Esrei, so Shmon Esrei ends with Baruch Ata Hashem, HaMavarech et Amo Yisrael B'Shalom. And then there's another pasuk that's thrown in there, which becomes an integral part of Shmon Esrei, Yiu l'ratzon imbrei fi ve'egyon libi lefanecha Hashem tzirui v'goali. Then you really finish Shmon Esrei. Now, if you look at your Siddur, there's something more. It says, Elokai netzol l'shoni mirav soter medam memar. And what is that? So the Gemara tells us that some of the Chachamim had a tefillah after the tefillah. Tefillah, tzeluta bate tzelute, a prayer after the prayer, a davening after the davening. So what is the davening after the davening? The Gemara, I counted this. There are 11 examples of a tefillah after the tefillah. One of them, it's actually the last on in the list, is what we say. That's the one of the last ones. So it's the Amayra Rava. It says Rava would say such and such. Somehow or another, that caught the attention of those who put the Siddur together finally in the days of the Geonim, Rav Amram Gaon, there's where we have a Siddur that already looks like our Siddur, and you have this tefillah after the tefillah, it's there in our Siddurim. That's the last example. But one of the examples is that was said 3 times a day after Shmon Esrei, V'titen lanu Chaim Aruchim, Chaim Shel Shalom, Chaim Shel Tova, Chaim Shel Bracha, and you have it right here. Rav, the Amora Rav, the beginning of the period of the Amoraim, Bata Tzulute, at the end of his Shmon Esrei, Amar Hachi, said the following, Yiratzon v'necha, Hashem Elokeinu. This has nothing to do with Rosh Chodesh. The business of Shetchadesh Aleinu et HaChodesh Hazeh L'Tova L'Vracha was interpolated, was thrown into this phrase when this tefillah of Rav became a monthly tefillah before Rosh Chodesh. In other words, it became instituted to say the tefillah that Rav would say 3 times a day, every single Shmoneh Esrei, is now taken out of context, what we call in computer language cut and paste. It was cut and pasted out of Rav's Siddur and pasted into our Siddur for Rosh Chodesh, and given such appropriateness, Shetchadesh Aleinu et HaChodesh Hazeh L'Tova L'Vracha V'titen Lanu Chaim Arukim Chaim Shel Shalom. But Rav never said Rosh Chodesh. It was said every day. So the bracha was, the tefillah was, Yiratzon V'nech Hashem Elokeinu, it should be God's will, Shetiten Lanu Chaim Arukim Chaim Shel Shalom, Chaim Shel Tova, Chaim Shel Bracha, Chaim Shel Parnasa, Chaim Shel Chizul Tzatzamot. I'm reading source 3. Chaim Sheyesh Behem Yirat Shamayim. Yirat Chet, rather. I wanted to see if you were listening. It doesn't say Yirat Shamayim. It just says Yirat Chet. Chaim she'en ben bushach lima, Chaim shelo shav chavod, Chaim she'tehei vanu avat Torah v'yirat Shamayim, Chaim she'tmalei lanu et kol mishalot libeinu l'tova. So Yirat Shamayim is only mentioned once. The second time, as if to say, after Chaim she'tehei vanu avat Torah, which means that when it was interpolated into the Siddur for use for Birkat HaChodesh, at some stage, Yirat Shamayim got thrown in by Yirat Chet, which really shouldn't be there. It shouldn't be there. And most probably it happened because when manuscripts were copied, so sometimes people copied by rote. Chaim Sheish Behem, he knew the word was Yirat, and wrote Yirat Shamayim. And they wrote Yirat Chet, and somehow it got in there by accident. That seems to be what happened here, because Yirat Shamayim is actually there already when we say Chayim Shetehei Vanu Avat Torah v'Yirat Shamayim. And there are 3 levels of Avodat Hashem. 3 levels. One is the lowest level, and that is you serve God because you fear punishment. You fear punishment. You know, if you do the Avera, you're going to get socked. You're going to get hit. So it's a low level of Avodat Hashem. The Rambam tells us in the end of Ilchot Shuvah that the lowest level of Avodat Hashem is this fear of sin, or you do it because of compensation. You know the Kadosh Baruch Hu is going to reward you. So reward and punishment, of course, is there. But if the only reason that you're serving a Kadosh Baruch Hu properly is because you fear punishment or you're looking forward for reward, Rambam says that's a pretty low level. And he says that's how we begin educating young people, and that's how we educate people who may be adults but were never educated before. So ladies, don't get insulted now. The Rambam puts into one basket Nashim, Ktanim, Uklal Amei Haaretz. He's not taking a shot at women for, God forbid, being delinquent in terms of intelligence. He's putting together in a basket, these are people who have not studied. Male adults who are amaratzim, women were never properly taught, and children. So all of those, the Rambam says, we have an obligation to bring up these people to the level of the next level, which is Avodat Hashem, from love, from Ava. And what is love? The Rambam was not a romanticist. The Rambam was not here with any degree of emotion whatsoever. He says, Aval pi hade'ah tiyeh ha'ava. Love is directly proportional to your knowledge. And therefore, he says, all of the above, women, children, and male adults who are ignorant have to study, and study as deep as possible. This is the famous Rambam that the Rav based himself upon with regard to teaching women Torah Shebal Peh on the highest level. Because if you go to the Rambam Talmud Torah, it's very interesting. Normally the Rambam will begin a section of halacha. There is a positive mitzvah to do such and such. And he'll name the mitzvah and then get into the details. He should have begun the section of Talmud Torah. There is a positive mitzvah to study Torah. He wouldn't have done that either. He would have written, there is a positive mitzvah to teach Torah. Rav Kapach Zatzal, in his translation of the Rambam's Book of Mitzvot, does not translate the way the Ibn Tibon popular medieval translation is, the mitzvah taseh lilmod ulilamed, to teach, to study rather, and to teach. He says the proper translation is mitzvah taseh lilamed Torah v'lilimda. It's to teach Torah and to study it. Of course, you have to study it because if you don't study it, you have nothing to teach. The first 7 halachot of the Mishnah Torah's Hilchot Talmud Torah is about teaching Torah. And then afterwards, in the 8th halacha, he says, by the way, you also have to study. Because if you don't study, you can have nothing to learn, to teach rather. So you have to study Torah for the purpose of teaching Torah. So before the Rambam even gets to that, the first word in Rambam Hilchot Torah is nashim, women. Women are exempt. No, he figured if a woman starts learning Hilchot Talmud Torah and only gets to the 3rd line that she's exempt, she's already studied 2 lines. So let's put it down on the first word. Now, what does that mean? It means that there is some type of exemption on some level, and that's a sheer in itself. But the Rav said, but the Rambam, when he talks about the mitzvah of Ahavat Hashem, love of God, which is fulfilled by study, not by kissing mezuzahs or Sefer Torah or the Kotel. It has nothing to do with kissing, has nothing to do with love. It has to do with study, intellectually connecting with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The Rambam says women are there. And why does he put together women with children and Klal Amei Haaretz? Because women weren't formally taught. That was a fact. That was a fact of social life. And that was changed by a personality who I stood by Akeva just last week, Sarah Schnera. And remember, the Rav gave that famous Gemara shir in 1976 to the opening of the Beit Midrash program at Stern College, and it was well publicized. I asked the Rav the next day, how do you feel being a revolutionary? He said, revolutionary? He said, Sarah Schnera was a revolutionary. After Sarah Schnera, it just became a question of syllabus. That's what he said. I upgraded the syllabus, that's all. Syllabus. Sarah Schnera, the founder of the Beit Yaakov movement in 1918. And we had Shabbos meal in her 2nd building in Krakow in 1920. The building opened in 1927, and she was there. Sarah Schnera. Where is she buried? In Krakow, in the old, actually the new cemetery of Krakow that was completely destroyed by the Nazis, and there is one surviving matzeva there, not Sarah Schnera's, but 1998, the women organization Nishei Agudat Yisrael, the women of Agudat Yisrael of America, came and put up a beautiful black marble matzeva smack in the middle of the cemetery. She's buried somewhere there, they don't know where, and that stands as a memorial till this very day. So I was there just on Monday before we went to the airport. So we parted with the memory of Sarah Schnera. So the Rambam there says there's Avodat Hashem from Yirah, that is Yirat Chet. There's Avodat Hashem from Ahava, and then there's an exalted type of Yirah, which is not fear, but it's awe. When the Torah says Et Hashem Elotecha Tira, it doesn't mean you have to be scared of God or afraid of God. It means you have to have awe. And the Rambam, when he talks about the mitzvah of Yirah or Morah, not Yirah, but Morah, it's a higher order. Now take a look at Pirkei Avot. In Pirkei Avot, you remember Antigonish Ish Socho, who received the Masoret from Shimon HaTzadik. He says, Al tehei ke'avadim hamshamshim et harav al menat lekabel pras. Don't be like the servant who's being rewarded every time. Ella, you should be like the Eved who serves his master, Shalo al manat lekabel pras, not because of receiving reward, because you're connected with the person. You just want to do everything for that person. And then it says, Vihi mora shamayim alechem. And you should have God-fearing. So the God-fearing there is the highest level of, that's called awe. That's morah. And that's exactly what happens in the tefillah of Rav. The first is Chayim Shehesh Behem Yirat Chet, the low level of you're fearing God, but you're fearing God because, of the sin. You don't want to be punished. And afterwards is Chayim Shehesh Behem Avat Torah, it's out of love. And finally, Chayim Shehesh Behem Yirat Shamayim. So you have the 3 levels of, the lowest level is fearing sin, and the next level is ahava, and that's through Torah. Avat Hashem is Avat Torah. It's exactly what the Rambam explained, that Ahava, that love is facilitated by Torah study. And then the highest level is Yirat Shamayim, and that is to have awe. And that awe, feeling of awe for God, you're supposed to have for your Rebbe as well. Yehi Mora Rabach Kimora Shamayim. That the way you have awe for Kadosh Baruch Hu, you should have it for your Rebbe as well. That doesn't always happen. But we had a big schut with our Rebbe the Rav. It did happen. Those who knew the Rav knew that you stood before him, b'dechilu urechimu, just trembling, and you thought very carefully before you opened your mouth and talked to him, and it trickled down to Rav Lichtenstein as well. We didn't have that with Rav Mital. Rav Mital, you could be folksy with him, and just schmoozy with him. But when you stood before Rav Lichtenstein in the Gush, in the yeshiva, you measured your words. You knew that you didn't want to waste his time if you had something to say. And it wasn't, how you doing today? This way. You never ever talked to him like that, nor did you ever talk to the Rav like that. And it was this sensation of very much of Morah Shamayim that was there with the Rav. So you have this Yehi Ratzon that we say as a preamble to the Birkat HaChodesh. So they took the tefillah of Rav, so much so that there's some people, when they get to the end of this tefillah on Birkat HaChodesh, they actually say, B'schut Tfilat Rav. So you have this in this text of source number 2. Some say B'schut Tfilat Rav, and some say B'schut Tfilat Rabim. So what is Rabim? I don't know. The schut of everybody. But the schut of Rav, it was thrown in because Rav was the composer of this tefillah, but it wasn't for Rosh Chodesh, for Birkat HaChodesh. It was for every day, 3 times a day. So, okay, if you say, you don't say it, it's not an integral part of the tefillah. But where does the Birkat HaChodesh really kick off? So people think it's from Rosh Chodesh so-and-so, Yeh B'yom so-and-so. Right, next week, this Shabbat, they'll say Rosh Chodesh Av, but they most probably say Rosh Chodesh Menachem Av. Yeh b'yom sheni, haba leinu l'tova, v'kol yisrael l'tova. Fine. But Misha Asa Nisim Lavotenu is actually the beginning of Birkat HaChodesh. And as the Sidurim correctly say, the Shliach Tzibur takes the Sefer Torah in his hand at that point. Why? Why does he hold the Sefer Torah? He's going to announce Rosh Chodesh so-and-so, Yeh b'yom so-and-so. And then we somehow or another say a bracha, we bless the Chodesh, Yichacheo Kadosh Baruch Hu, and all of Klal Yisrael, wherever they may be. That's interesting, wherever they may be, B'chol Makom Shehem, L'tova, L'vracha, L'soson, L'simcha, L'shuah, L'chama, L'fanasa, Tova, L'chakala, L'chaim Tov, L'shalom. Up until this point, it's cut and pasted out of Musaf for Rosh Chodesh. On the Musaf for Rosh Chodesh, we say, Elokeinu L'kevatenu, Chadesh Aleinu Et HaChodesh Hazeh, L'tova, L'vracha, L'soson, L'simcha, L'shuah, L'chama. All this is straight out. But here on Shabbat, we have a few add-ons. L'shmot Tovot, Psorot Tovot. The comedians say Shmo Tovot in Yiddish is good herring for the Kiddush. It's a good herring. Shmo Tovot means to hear well, right? But it means good tidings, good news. And boy, this is something that since Simchat Torah we use so often. Psorot Tovot, right? Shmo Tovot, Psorot Tovot. And then in the winter we throw in Kshamim Bi'itam, it should rain in a proper time. And of course, that's not mentioned until Rosh Chodesh Cheshvan, when it's the rain season. And I actually saw in some Sidurim that in this, we don't say this, not a minute, but in the summer, instead of saying L'Gshamim Be'itam, rain in a season, but to say L'Talalei Bracha, do as a bracha, because Tal U'Matal Bracha, so Tal is appropriate, do is appropriate even in the summer. So we say Mored Tal in the summer months. So there was some in Birkat HaChodesh, the flip side of L'Gshamim Be'itam, saying rain in its proper time, that you're not going to say that in Tammuz and Av in the summer. So to say something about Tal Livracha, L'Talalei Bracha. It's not now a Siddur. And Refuah Shalema always works, and Gula Krova for sure we need, no doubt. So you have the Birkat HaChodesh. So what is Misha Asa Nisim Lavotenu? Misha Asa Nisim Lavotenu, V'ga'al otanu me'avdut l'cherut. Kadosh Baruch Hu performed miracles for us and delivered us from avdut l'cherut. This is all Yetziat Mitzrayim. Hu yig'al otanu b'karov. He should, in the very short time, redeem us again. V'kabeis nidachenu me'arba kanfot haaretz, and shall bring Am Yisrael together from all corners of the world. Chaverim kol Yisrael v'nomar amen. What does that mean? We're all friends? Are we all friends? Read the newspapers, you find that it's not so clear. What does it mean? Chaverim kol Yisrael. What does that mean? And then the Chazan goes on to announce the Rosh Chodesh. And he's holding a Sefer Torah. What's happening here? What is this all about? What is this Birkat HaChodesh? If we want to give the month a blessing, why don't we do it on next Monday, which is Rosh Chodesh? The answer is we do, in Musaf. We do it in the Musaf. So what is this, the Shabbat before? So people in Shul, we're announcing Rosh Chodesh. What's the matter? You didn't get a calendar on every Rosh Chodesh from the Emunah women, with an envelope, to give a donation, right? So or any other organization that gives you an envelope at Erev Rosh Hashanah that tells you, you look at the calendar, you see when it's Rosh Chodesh. What is this all about? It's a zecher. For what? It's not a zecher for the Kiddush HaChodesh. No, it's not a zecher for Kiddush HaChodesh. It's a zecher for the responsibility of Beit Din to publicize the Rosh Chodesh. Where do we see that? Let's take a look a little further in the page. And we'll get back to the Mishasa. On source number 4, the Rambam tells us, Ein mechashvin v'kovim chodashim. We do not calculate and establish Rosh Chodesh, or Ma'abrim Shanim, or create the new year. This is all talking about when this was done as an act of Beit Din. The Beit Din in Eretz Yisrael. And it was only in Eretz Yisrael. Shenemar, as it says, Ki mitzion tetzei Torah advar Hashem Yerushalayim. There's one exception. If the Gadol Hador, who is the acclaimed Gadol Hador, not like today. Who's the Gadol Hador? Just tell me who you voted for in the last election. I'll tell you who your Gadol Hador is. That's all. Everybody's got their Gadol Hador. So if you're in Panovich Yeshiva, it's his yeshiva, his Rosh Yeshiva. If you're a Shas person, it's this one. It's Rav Avad Yosef. He died, so what? He's still there. If you're a Babich Chosid, it's clearly the Babich Rebbe. Everybody with his Gadol Hador. So there's no acclaimed Gadol Hador today at all. At all. It's regional, right? You can't even have one Rav Rashi, right? Today you don't even have any, by the way. It's by legal, you know that. There's no Rav Rashi. Did anybody lose any sleep over that? Nobody lost any sleep, right? Because it expired, right? There's no Rav Rashi today. Right, that's right. There's no Rav Rashi because of political shenanigans. That's why. There's no other word for it. So, okay, nobody lost any sleep over it. And I can tell you that when the Rav was offered the position in 1959, after Rav Herzog passed away, he thought about it for a half a year. No, it wasn't just, no, not for me. Thought about it for a half a year, and then turned it down. So I asked the Rav, and I'm sure 1,000 other people asked the Rav, why he turned it down, and there were 1,000 answers out there, and I bet you the Rav said 1,000 different things to different people. It's all true. Fine. So I asked him, was it true that because his uncle who was still alive, Rav Velvila Soloveitchik, was vehemently against it? So Rav said it's true, the uncle was against it, but he says that wasn't the critical thing. So what was the critical? I pushed. He said, because look, the chief rabbinate doesn't emanate from Shulchan Aruch. It's a law in the Knesset. So it's called in Hebrew, you're Rav Mita'am. You're working for the government. You're working for the government, and therefore you can't say what you want to say, when you want to say, how you want to say. You surrendered your independence. And he believed that a Rav has to be independent, and therefore he said, look, I have respect for those who were before, and Rav Kook, Rav Herzog, Rav Uziel, I have great respect for all of them, but it's not for me. He said, not for me. And then, as an afterthought, mamish as an afterthought, he says, in the offices of all the government leaders and the president's house here by Bushi Herzog, you have a photo gallery of all the predecessors. It's true. I saw it with my own eyes in the Beit HaNasi. You see it in the Russian Prime Minister's office, and the ministers. They all have all the predecessors, and by the Rav Rashi, by the Chief Rabbinate, there's also photos, a gallery of the predecessors. The Rav says, I don't have a problem being on the wall with those who my predecessors here. I might have a problem being on the wall with those who come afterwards. Wow! You see, he was a Navi. He was a Navi. chief rabbi went to jail and this and that. Yep. What's the difference? Let's not talk about it. Let's not. Mini, mini, mo. Okay? The Rav knew what he was talking about. So, the idea of Gedol b'Torah, the Chazal say, there once was one who was the acclaimed Gedol Ador, that was Rabbi Akiva. Shelo hiniach kamoto ba'aretz. If he would have been in Chutz La'aretz, he would have been carrying with him the name of Klal Yisrael, personifying Klal Yisrael, and he could have done Kiddush HaChodesh in Chutz La'aretz because he's walking around on his shoulders with all of Klal Yisrael. Which means the Gemara is teaching us there that Kiddush HaChodesh and Ibur HaShana, this putting the calendar into place, is a function of Klal Yisrael. It's not judicial. Nobody's on trial here. But the judges are like the electoral college. They are representing all of Klal Yisrael. And that is very, very important to know, that it is a function of Klal Yisrael. And that's why, in order to have a zecher of Kiddush HaChodesh, of Beit Din, of the judicial activity, number one, the use of the Sefer Torah is there to create an environment of the place of the Shechina, God's presence, which was always there in judicial action. Elokim nitzav ba'adat kel. We say it every Tuesday morning in the Shir Shal Yom. And that's why the judges had to have a talus with the talus over their head, because there was a presence of Shechina. That was one of the first acts of the sitting down in judiciary, was they put a talus on. And a talus was only put on when they are standing in front of the Shechina. And that's why they did the talus. And that's why there's a talus by Brit Milah, by the way, because the Kadosh Baruch Hu's presence is there. And that's why there's a talus during davening, because the Kadosh Baruch Hu's presence is there. That's the idea of ituf, to be me'utaf b'talit. So the idea of taking a Sefer Torah is actually to bring the presence of the Beit Din, create that kind of scenario of presence of a Kadosh Baruch Hu, but it must necessarily be in the presence of Klal Yisrael. And therefore, what do we ask for? Let's get all of Klal Yisrael back together in Eretz Yisrael so that this Beit Din can function once again. It won't function until Klal Yisrael is back in Eretz Yisrael. And then we say, Chaverim Kol Yisrael. The Rav said, the only object that has the ability of unifying all of Klal Yisrael is a Sefer Torah. Everything else we're divided, everything else. But the Sefer Torah, even though there are different ways, modes of interpretation and different minhagim, different customs and all that, but everyone will subscribe to the sanctity, the kedusha of a Sefer Torah. Makes no difference if it's a Sephardi or Ashkenazi, makes no difference. That every Jew will be Moser Nefesh, will sacrifice for a Sefer Torah and do everything to save a Sefer Torah, no matter which shul it comes from. There's something about a Sefer Torah. I said this once in a Siyam Masechet in Ramot. A gentleman finished whatever he finished. He made a Siyam, may have been the Daf Yomi series of Shas, and he invited his extended family to the dinner. And at the extended dinner, the extended family included people who were there without kippot and people there with shtraimlach. I mean, every family has, a few who are off the derech here and a few are doing this, and a few are that. It was just a beautiful sight. And I said, only a Sefer Torah could have brought this family together in this kind of a get-together. Because that's the power of a Sefer Torah. Chaverim Ko, that's why the Rav said, that's why the Chazan holds the Sefer Torah when he says the Misha Sanisim. Because if you wouldn't hold the Sefer Torah, the Chaverim Kol Yisrael, you could challenge that. It may not be so valid and so authentic. But holding the Sefer Torah, this can happen. And here the Rambam tells us something phenomenal in source number 5 on the bottom of the page, with regard to the mitzvah of Kiddush HaChodesh, sanctifying the moon by judicial action. The Rambam believes that if there is no Beit Din, so how do we have Rosh Chodesh today? Well, it's in the calendar. What is that? Calendar is a piece of paper. So how does it work? So most of the Rishonim believe that at the end of the tenure of the Beit Din, the Beit Din HaGadol in Eretz Yisrael, there was an emergency measure that was used, that Rosh Chodesh can be sanctified not only for a particular Rosh Chodesh, but also for subsequent Roshei Chodashim. And what they did in the days of the second Hillel, not the famous Hillel with Shammai, but Hillel Hasheni, who's a great-grandson of Rabbi Yehuda Nasi. So we're talking about the period of the Amoraim already, in Eretz Yisrael. They sanctified every Rosh Chodesh until Yemot HaMashiach, until Eliyahu Navi. And like in an emergency action. That's how most understand it. The Rambam understands it differently. He says what they did was, they gave us the calendar of the 19 years that just repeats itself every 19 years. That the Rambam agrees with the others. But he says the Kiddush HaChodesh is actually effectively initiated by having at least 1 million of Jews in Eretz Yisrael every Rosh Chodesh to activate the calendar. If you wouldn't have 1 million of Jews in Eretz Yisrael in any generation to activate the calendar, then that day is not Rosh Chodesh, and if there was a Yom Tov in that month, if it happened to be Nisan, there's no Pesach for anybody, and there's no Rosh Hashanah for anybody, and there's no Sukkot for anybody, no Yom Kippur for anybody, no Chanukah for anybody, nothing, if you don't have the Rosh Chodesh sanctified. And the sanctification of the moon, according to Rosh Chodesh, according to Rambam, in our days, is by having at least 1 million of Jews in Eretz Yisrael who represent all of Klal Yisrael. And the Rambam believes that Jews abroad, I know the Jews in Teaneck didn't like when I said this to them, are just mishpacha, they're related, that's all. But Klal Yisrael is here. So today we have more than 10 Jews in Eretz Yisrael. We have almost 7 million Jews in Eretz Yisrael today. More than 10. And look at what the Rambam says here in source 5. He says, Vikan shorish gadol me'od mishorshei ha'emunah. Rambam's Rav Kapach's translation is Yisod Gadol mi Yisodot HaTorah. That's how Rav Kapach translates it. It's one of the fundamentals. And here in the Ibn Tibon, it's a root, one of the greatest roots of Shorshei Emunah, of our belief. And he says, turn the page where it's underlined. Turn the page where it's underlined on top. Well, not underlined, bold, where it's bold. ואנחנו אומנם נחשב היום כדי שנדע היום שקבעו הם. Yes, we have the calculation because they made the calculation. Who made the calculation? רצונו לומר, בני ארץ ישראל. בו ראש חודש, כי במלאכת הזאת בעצמה מונים וקובעים היום, לא בעירייה. We don't have visual sighting of the moon. Today it's all by calculation. ועל קביעתם נסמוך. We rely on their calculation that they made. Fine. But that's not the end of it. Drop down till 3 lines to the end of this source. 5 lines before the source, where it says, 6 lines before the end of the source, where it says, Va'ani osif lecha bi'ur. I'm going to add something here. This is something that the Rambam deserved Gan Eden just for these lines. Ilu efshar derech mashal, which means if I could just postulate, hypothesize a scenario. Shebnei Eretz Yisrael ye'adru me'Eretz Yisrael. There be no Jews in Eretz Yisrael in any given Rosh Chodesh. And then before he even goes further, he knows you're already fainting. You're fainting. God forbid. Like somebody say, Chas v'sholom. And that's what he says. Chalila le'el me'asotzot. God forbid. Ki hu iftiach shelo yimache otot ha'umah mikol v'chol. God has assured us that he would never, ever annihilate Klal Yisrael, and not having 1 million, you'll see where he gets million, 1 million of Jews in Eretz Yisrael, a minimum quorum of Am Yisrael, that's called the annihilation of Am Yisrael, and then Hitler wins. That's called the annihilation of Am Yisrael. If there be no million of Jews in Eretz Yisrael, Am Yisrael is basically annihilated. And because HaKadosh Baruch Hu said he would never do this, so this would never happen. But theoretically, he says, V'lo yesham beitin, v'lo yeh b'chutz la'aretz, beitin shenismach ba'aretz, that had the smich of old, hine cheshbonenu zeh lo yo'ilenu az klum, our calculation, our calendar was worth nothing, b'shum panim. Lefi she'ein lanu reshut shenechashev b'chutz la'aretz. We don't have the right in chutz la'aretz to do this. V'na'aber shanim, to create the shana muberet, the leap year. V'nikba chodashim ela b'tna'im haniskarim kamo shebiarnu shene'emar ki b'tzion tetzeh Torah advar Yerushalayim. Why is all this an Eretz Yisrael subject? And the Rav explained, because Eretz Yisrael is the place of Klal Yisrael, as the Rambam's teaching, and Kiddush HaChodesh and Yom Tov is Klal Yisrael. As it says, HaChodesh Hazeh Lachem Rosh Chodashim. When was that said? Right at Yetziat Mitzrayim, Shmot Perek Yud Bet. Where was Am Yisrael formed? Where was it formed? At Yetziat Mitzrayim. That's where it happens, the formation of Am Yisrael. That's why Misha Asa Nisim Lavotenu V'Ga'al Otanu Me'avdut L'Cherut. Where did that take place? At Yetziat Mitzrayim. Then we ask Kadosh Baruch Hu, he should give us the possibility of renewing the whole process by bringing all of Klal Yisrael back to Eretz Yisrael. V'Kabetz Nidachenu Me'arbak Anfot Haaretz. Chaverim Kol Yisrael, we're creating a scenario, and we are just as a zecher going to do something that the Beit Din had the obligation to do, and we'll see this in a moment, to publicize when Rosh Chodesh will be. That's what we're doing here. We're publicizing when Rosh Chodesh will be as a zecher to the act of Beit Din. Now, some of you may remember that in the Rinat Yisrael Siddur, I'm not opening this to read my mail. I'm opening this because I took a picture of the Rinat Yisrael Siddur. I didn't want to schlep it. On Yom Ha'atzmaut, in many of our shuls, we have a little bit of added davenings just to make it a little bit Yom Tov dik, as we say in Yiddish, Yom Tov dik. So one of the things that we do is there is a Misha Asa Nisim Lavotenu said, but it's not exactly the way it's said on Birkat HaChodesh. It reads, Misha Asa Nisim Lavotenu Vilanu, and to us, not only them, but also us, Ugalanu Me'avdut L'Cherut, Hu Yigalenu Gula Shlema Bekarov. In other words, the Gula really started, but we're hoping that it should be completed. Now, we had a gentleman in our shul, a big Talmid Chacham, and before I came, he was adamant that this Yom Ha'atzmaut Misha Asa Nisim should be the Misha Asa Nisim that should be said every month. And he even had the Gabaim print up stickers of the Yom Ha'atzmaut print and stick it on the Musaf on Shabbos print by Birkat HaChodesh. And when I came there, I had a canary. I said, no, I had very good relations with this person. And the only compromise I was able to work out with him was that it's going to be the Baal Tfila's choice. But and very rare things would I make a fuss. But here I explained that what was changed for Yom Ha'atzmaut to make it Yom Ha'atzmaut compatible is very nice and dandy, and that's the chief rabbinate, and I have nothing to say about that. But that's not the point of the Misha Asa Nisim on Birkat HaChodesh. We're not talking about Medinat Yisrael. We're talking about Yetziat Mitzrayim, where Am Yisrael was formed. Misha Asa Nisim Lavotenu V'Ga'al Otanu Me'avdut L'Cherut Hu Yigal Otanu. That was the poenta, as they say. That was the point of the Misha Asa Nisim, to go back to the moment of the formation of Klal Yisrael, and that Klal Yisrael then becomes part and parcel of our experience in Eretz Yisrael. And to that end, we turn to HaKadosh Baruch Hu and say, give us the opportunity to bring everybody back to Eretz Yisrael, to join Klal Yisrael, who's already here. On the second side of this page, in source number 8, you have the Rambam teaching us the halakha. Let me just look at 6 for a second. You'll see where the Rambam defines Klal Yisrael. Lefi shebnei Eretz Yisrael heim asher nikrein kahal. Am Yisrael is called kahal. Who's Am Yisrael? Bnei Eretz Yisrael. V'Hashem kar'am kol hakahal. This is going to be a tricky thing. Where does Hashem call them kol hakahal? But then the Rambam adds, V'afilu hayu asara achadim. Even if you just have 10 means a minyan. You have a minyan of Klal Yisrael in Eretz Yisrael, that's Klal Yisrael. Less than that, there is no Klal Yisrael in Eretz Yisrael. And Rav Kapach points out in his edition of the Mishnah commentary from Masechet Bechorot of source number 6, where does HaKadosh Baruch Hu call Klal Yisrael ever kol hakahal? He says he doesn't know. And I stuck my neck out and I said, I think it's source number 7, that it begins, Ve'im kol adat Yisrael yishgu v'ne'elam davar me'enei hakahal. As if to say, kol dat hakahal. I have a hunch that this is the pasuk where Chazal used the phrase Kol HaKahal in Masechet Horiyot, and it's related to this pasuk, and it's related to Am Yisrael and Eretz Yisrael, and I think the Rambam simply condensed this pasuk where it's Ve'im Kol, and it's Adat Yisrael Yishgu V'ne'elam Davar Me'enei HaKahal. I think that's what the Rambam referred to, but the idea is that 10 Jews in Eretz Yisrael, that's Klal Yisrael. Look at source number 8. Source number 8, the Rambam teaches us the halacha that Barishonah, originally when there was Kiddush HaChodesh by sighting of the moon, Kishayu Beitin Mikachin et HaChodesh, Hayu Mesi'in Mesuot. They used to light bonfires on the tops, on the apex of many mountains in Eretz Yisrael, and it spread from mountain to mountain, and this was the means of communication, Kedei sheyedu harechokim. So those who are far away from Yerushalayim will quickly enough know that it's Rosh Chodesh. But then there was the group called the Kutim in Eretz Yisrael that started making fires to mess up the system. The system didn't work any longer, so that's when they started sending messengers, and because the messengers never reached Bavel, within 2 weeks before Rosh Chodesh of Nisan, they never knew when Pesach was, and here was born Yom Tov Sheni. Yom Tov Sheni was born because of this, because the Shlichim never made it to Bavel. And this, from here you see, and look at the next source in number 9, where the Rambam says, Bisman Shosim al Riyah, he says there, you have this concept of figuring out. The Rambam starts teaching us how to figure out the precise moment when the witnesses could have possibly seen the moon. He says, Kederach she'itztaninim osim, like the astronomers know how to figure this one out. What do we call that moment? The molad. We call it the moment. Well, the astronomers. They're astrologers, right? But the Rambam here, he actually means astronomy. The Rambam knew the difference between astronomy and astrology. And Atztininim, many times that he astrologers, but he meant those who know something about the constellations, and they have it figured out nicely in a calculation. And then the Rambam goes on to give us all the calculations. Takes him about 8-9 chapters to break it down into the mathematics and physics and the astrophysics of astronomy to figure out exactly when it is. We call it the molad. And the minhag is that the gabbai announces the molad. And there are some shuls that think that the moon only understands Yiddish. Right? I'm sure there's still shuls in Eretz Yisrael who they say, the moiled vet sein, muntig noch mittag, and they give the day and the hour and the chalakim, because the hour is divided into chalakim, into 1,080 chalakim, and they get it down to, the micro, and it's called the moiled. I got news for you. The moiled, the Levana understands Hebrew also, and it can be said in any language. But what is interesting is that there were different opinions whether the molad should be said regionally, which if you're in New York, the molad's going to be a different hour than let's say in Yerushalayim. But the general custom evolved that we give the molad of Eretz Yisrael or the molad of Yerushalayim, no matter where you are. Why? Because what makes Rosh Chodesh for the New Yorkers and those in Chicago and Los Angeles and in Tokyo is the Rosh Chodesh here in Eretz Yisrael. This is what makes Rosh Chodesh, not what goes on in Chutz La'aretz. And therefore, the moiled of Yerushalayim is the moiled that's usually given. Yeah. They don't announce the moiled because not every place picked up on the minhag to announce the moiled. The minhag of announcing the moiled kicked in after there was already a minhag of saying Birkat HaChodesh. So some wanted to, as an add-on, to give the precise moment, but the precise moment is going to be in Yerushalayim. It's going to be in Yerushalayim, right? There's no Aveira to say it. You like that one? There's no Aveira to say it. It's like Rav Amital was once asked, do you not say Tachnun on a morning on Monday or Thursday if there's a bar mitzvah boy selling his bar mitzvah? He said, it doesn't say anywhere that the day of a boy's bar mitzvah you have to say Tachnun. You get that? Doesn't say it. So the answer really is you're supposed to say Tachton. Doesn't say that you don't say. Lo mishneh. The Birkat HaChodesh you can say privately, but that's not what it was meant for. It was meant as a public announcement in shul, and that's why it's in shul before Musaf, after Kriyat HaTorah, where the attendance in shul is at its peak. Right? All the late comers have come. All the early, the guys who leave early are still there. So that's why Birkat HaChodesh is there. That's why Tkiyat Shofar is there at that point. And that's why Tal and Geshem is there. Because you want to have the crowd at that point. And more people come to Shul on Shabbat than come to in a weekday Rosh Chodesh. And that's why it's not on Rosh Chodesh. But this announcement is made when you have the biggest crowd. Because the purpose of this Birkat HaChodesh is to remember the responsibility of Beit Din to get the word out to the crowd. And that's why we do it. So if somebody's home and you want to say it, Bakasha, you can say it. There's no Aveira to say it. But certainly that was never part of the minhag. The custom was that it was something that was done in the as public as you can make it, right then and there. Yeah.
What is the purpose of announcing the Mola?
The purpose of announcing the Mola was just an add-on, just to say that if we would have the mitzvah of Kiddush HaChodesh, the first moment that the witnesses would be able to see it would be at that precise moment. That's when they could have seen it. They most probably didn't see it at that moment because the moon, the visibility of the moon was minuscule. But if the witnesses would come and they would interrogate them and they would say, so when did you see the moon? Well, I saw it at 10 o'clock at night. They would say you're a bunch of liars because the Moiled wasn't until 11. In other words, you couldn't have seen it possibly, physically. So this was part of the information that the judges would have when they interrogated the witnesses who came and they said they saw the moon. You can only see it after the Moiled. Before the Moiled, you couldn't see it because it's already blackout. And if you saw something before the Moiled, you actually saw last month. Well, if you squint a little bit. If you squint. It should be a fraction of a moment that you'd be able to see the slightest sliver of white. The slightest sliver. Of course, afterwards you see it larger. What? If you know where to look for it. You also have to know where to look for it. The Mishnah tells us that in the upper story, Kol Mashtayim, of Rabbi Gamliel, in his Lishka, he had an office. The president, the head of the Nasi of the Beit Din HaGadol. He had a board with moon shapes. And the Gemara even talks about, how can you have shapes? Lo ta'aselecha pesel v'chol tmuna. The Gemara talks about the Masechet Rosh Hashanah. How did he even have it? But that's a shaila of Hilchos Avodah Zarah. But here, it said he had shapes of moons. And he said, did you see this? Did you see this? Did you see it this way or that way? And so on. And that was done to trip up the witnesses to see if they actually saw the moon. And those witnesses had to be brought to Beit Din even on Shabbat, just to make sure that they got the Rosh Chodesh in. Of course, what's going to happen in Mirz Hashem, when we reinstitute the Beit Din, there's going to be telecommunication there in the Beit Din, and every Gabbai is going to have his little cell phone wide open and 6 a.m, and they're going to hear live Mekudash, and the Gabbai is going to go Ya'aleh v'yavoy, and everybody's going to know it's Rosh Chodesh, and Mirz Hashem, it's going to be a great day, and we will fulfill once again HaChodesh Zeh Lachem Rosh Chodeshim, and Eile Moadei Hashem Mikrei Kodesh Asher Tikru Otam from the word Atem, you, Klal Yisrael, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu said, it's in your hands to make the Rosh Chodesh, it's in your hands to make the Yomim Tovim, and that's why we will say next Monday, Baruch Ata Hashem Mikadesh Yisrael V'Roshei Chodashim. Okay. Next week, again, we'll have our last shir here in the center. We'll deal with Rosh Chodesh, on Rosh Chodesh, the Hallel on Rosh Chodesh, and then we will continue in Chodesh Elul in September in Rabbi Wein's Shul on Wednesdays at 9:15. Okay.